أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. Respected elders, beloved brothers and friends, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. As we read the Quran, as we read the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we can't help noticing that although the Quran has, or while the Quran has guidance on many issues, the Quran also tells us a lot about the Quran itself. In so many different verses of the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us different things about the Quran. During our tafsir this year, inshallah, we will be looking at some of those verses, just a handful of those verses, wherein Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks to us, informs us about some of the characteristics of the Quran, some of the incidents behind the revelation of the Quran, some of the challenges Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam faced in the propagation of Quran. We'll start off today with the verse in the beginning of Surah Baqarah, wherein Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. That is the book in which there is no doubt. In it is guidance for those who have taqwa. In order to understand this verse, or in order for us to really appreciate this verse, let's look at three aspects of this verse. Firstly, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commences by describing the Quran as kitab, by calling the Quran kitab. Now we can simply translate the word kitab as book, open the dictionary and understand the meaning of the word kitab is book. But a little bit more context, a little bit of more connotation to the word book or the word kitab. Scholars of the Arabic language, ulama explain that really speaking this word kitab comes from the letters kaf, ta, ba, katbun, which refers to anything that is put together, any kind of separate or anything that is separate and then that is then put together. So for example, we call a book kitabun because a book normally comprises of different letters and different words that have been put together. Similarly, from the same root letters you have the word katibatun. Katiba refers to the battalion of an army, the squadron of an army. The reason why the katiba is called such is because it's made up of a number of different people. So in the same way, ulama explain that, look, why is the Quran called kitab? Either because the Quran is made up of a number of different ayat, a number of different surah, a number of different surahs, a number of different verses and a number of different chapters. Also, the Quran can be called kitab for the same reason that any other book is called kitab. Just as any book is called kitab, the Quran is also recorded in the form of a book, and so the Quran is called kitab. And a third reason, which is mentioned by some of the ulama, that just as the katiba, just as the word katiba is used to refer to a squadron or an army, in the same way the Quran is referred to as kitab because the Quran serves as an army against the enemies of darkness, against the armies of darkness. The Quran serves as a means of driving away the forces of batil. And just like a normal king, a king in this world would use his army to impose his law, to impose his government upon the people, in the same way, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses the Quran to impose his sharia on you and I. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses the sharia, the Quran to impose sharia on mankind. That's kitabun. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions another description for the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes the Quran as la rayba fihi. There is no doubt in it. Now, I want us to all just pause and ponder for a second. If we have to step out of the boundaries of this madrasa, the first thing we're going to encounter is we're going to find people who don't believe in the Quran. Let alone people who have a few doubts or a few question marks on the Quran. We'll find people who absolutely who absolutely disbelieve, absolutely deny the veracity of the Quran. So then how can Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala refer to the Quran as la rayba fihi? Simple answer. Ulama explain that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes the Quran as la rayba fihi, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala means is that if a person is sane, If a person has the least amount of aql, the least amount of sanity, and if that person has to actually read the Quran with an open mind and a fair heart, a clean heart, then that person will not be able to doubt in the Quran. La rayba fi, there's no reason for anyone who reads the Quran honestly and clearly for him to doubt. Finally, the third description that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in this ayat over here, Hudal lil muttaqeen. The Quran is a means of guidance for those who have taqwa, for those who fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now once again, we're going to ask you to pause and ponder for a second. If someone has taqwa, why do they need guidance? Somebody is muttaqi, why does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say that they need guidance? Again, we need to understand what is taqwa. We need to understand the different darajat or the different levels of taqwa. Very broadly speaking, you get three different types of taqwa. The first level or the first type of taqwa is that which prevents a person from shirk. That which prevents a person from kufr, from disbelieving in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then the second kind of taqwa is for a person to abstain, to stay away from the kaba'ir, the major sins. For him to stay away from being persistent in committing minor sins as well. And finally, the third or the highest level of taqwa is for a person to avoid that which may be permissible out of fear that it may in the future lead to something which is impermissible. Three different levels of taqwa. Now, Hudal lil muttaqeen. If we look at the disbelievers, the Quran is a means of guidance for those who will one day become muttaqi, if they really have to follow what is in the Quran. And then if we look at those who have achieved the first level of taqwa, those who at least have saved themselves from shirk and from kufr, then Quran is a means of them being guided to a higher level of taqwa, the second level of taqwa. And for those who have already attained the second level of taqwa, then too the Quran is a means of guidance for them to reach the third level of taqwa. And for those who have reached the third level of taqwa, the Quran is a means of them increasing more and more and more in that level of taqwa. Hudal lil muttaqeen, a means of guidance. Let's look at the ayat on a whole. ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. That is the book in which there is no doubt, a guidance, a means of guidance for those who have taqwa. What's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaking of over here? ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ. That book. Which book? Which book? Ulama explained that obviously this is referring to this book. The book right in front of us, the Quran that we read in every day. So if we're speaking of this book that's right here in front of us, why does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speak of that book? ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ. Many different answers have been proposed, many different answers mentioned by the ulama. We'll mention one or two simple answers. The one answer is that, every day we read so many times Surah Al-Fatiha. And in Surah Al-Fatiha, we read إِيَّاكَ نَعْبُدُ وَإِيَّاكَ نَسْتَعِينُ إِهْدِنَا الصِّرَاطَ الْمُسْتَقِيمُ. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for guidance to the straight path. And now when we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for guidance to the straight path, it's like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving us an answer, an immediate response to our prayers. That's the book in which there is guidance. That's the book in which there is guidance for those who have taqwa. And a second answer that ulama have mentioned, it's like someone is asking a question. It's like someone is posing a question. What you going on about the Quran for? What's so great about the Quran? What makes the Quran so great? The answer that is given, ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ. That's the book. Almost like there's no other book. There's nothing else, no other book that deserves to be called a book even. That's how great this book is. The eloquence in this book, the rhetoric in this book, the perfection of this book. The question comes again, what's so perfect about the book? You claim this book is so great, it's so perfect. What's the perfection of this book? La rayba fi. In order for a book to be perfect, there must be no mistakes. Show me one other book that's perfect. Show me one other book that has no mistakes, no errors. Every book, and those who are involved in writing will know that anything you write will have mistakes. Not the kitab, not the Quran. La rayba fi. And now finally the third question comes. You're saying that there's no mistakes. What's the proof? Where's the proof that there's no mistakes in this? The answer to that question, the fact that this kitab will take you where you need to go. The fact that this kitab won't mislead you. هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. It will guide those who have taqwa wherever they need to go. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us